Hi, I'm Arlen Geyer. This tutorial is about cropping and resizing digital images using Adobe Photoshop. The issues around resizing are different if your goal is for print versus if your goal is for the web. So I will start by talking about the considerations for print. A digital image is comprised of pixels, and it has a certain number of pixels. If I zoom in here, if I zoom way in on this image, you'll see the individual pixels. Each pixel is a single solitary color. So that is the basic building block of a digital image. The image has a certain number of pixels, which we can see if I click on image and image size. This image has 3,861 pixels across and 2,571 pixels high. You could print this literally any size you want, and it's still going to have the same number of pixels. So if I make sure this unsample image here is unchecked, then notice if it is checked, then I can actually change the number of pixels. I'll talk about that later. Right now, I'm interested in not changing the number of pixels, and I want to see how big I can print it. If I want to print this at 14.3 inches wide, then it's going to print at 270 pixels per inch, because if you divide 3,861 pixels by 14.3, and luckily Photoshop has done the math for us, you'll end up with 270. But say I want to print it only 10 inches wide. Then it's going to be 386.1 pixels per inch. Again, because you divide the width by the width in pixels by the width you want to print it, and it tells you how many pixels per inch you have. That's because we're not changing the number of pixels. But as I said, you could print this literally any size you want. Let's say I want to print it, what are my options here? I don't have feet or yards or miles, so let's just stick with inches. And let's say I want to print it at 1,000 inches across. It's going to be printed at 3.861 pixels per inch. Some of those electronic billboards that have individual lights to produce the image, I've done a little math on one of those and discovered that it was 1 pixel per inch. So if we change this to 1 pixel per inch, we can see that we can print it at 3,861 inches. What do you know? That's the same number of pixels. So you can print it any size you want. You can print it even bigger than that and have fewer than 1 pixel per inch. So you can print it literally any size you want. But the goal is you don't want to see the individual pixels. The standard resolution for commercial printing is 300 pixels per inch. So if I set this at 300 pixels per inch, it'll show me that I can print it at 12.87 inches wide by 8.58 inches high. And so for commercial printing, that's the largest I would be able to print this. Now, I can resample the file, which means I can actually change the number of pixels. But when I do that, what Photoshop is doing is it's recalculating all of this information. So if we go back to, I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to zoom in on a little tiny area here. Let's look at this section right here again. So if I resample the image, what's going to do is instead of having 1 pixel right here, Photoshop is going to say, well, I need to have a pixel here and then one right here, let's say, and one right here. So it's going to average the values of these 2 pixels to produce what the value of a pixel in between those should be. So it's going to basically recalculate all of the pixels, and in the process, you essentially lose quality. So even though you can, the technical term for increasing the number of pixels is up-resing, or increasing the resolution. You can do that, but you actually don't gain anything in the process. And in fact, technically, you actually can lose quality in the process. You would end up not seeing the pixels the way you do here. You, instead of seeing pixels, you just see kind of a blurred area where Photoshop has figured out what values should be in between those pixels. So you can up-res an image, but you don't gain any quality by doing that. So for print, basically you don't want to decrease the number of pixels you've got because there's no harm in having more pixels per inch. There is a problem in having too few pixels per inch. So for print, you want to keep the image size, the number of pixels, as high as the original file had. Now let's talk for a bit about cropping. In Photoshop, I can crop an image. The crop tool is on the left side, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th tool down. And there are several options in there. I want the crop tool. And I can click and drag around the area I want to crop on. I don't have to hit it exactly right away because I can now grab onto one of these little handles on the sides or on the corners and change the shape of what I am going to crop. In the process of cropping, I can also rotate the file. If I move my cursor just outside of this rectangle, you'll see that the cursor changes to a curved arrow. And if I click there, I can now change that. And if I change it like this, when I click OK, this is going to be the top of the image. And I'll just show you what that looks like. It would look like that. And now I can click on Edit, Undo Crop to go back to the original. So in the process of cropping, I can change the dimensions, I can change the proportions. If I want to maintain the proportions, I'm going to make a crop that is the whole image right now, so it's actually not cropping anything. If I hold the Shift key down while I move in from a corner, it's going to maintain the proportions. So it's got the same relationship between height and width when I do that. When I crop the image, ordinarily, the pixels are staying the same. So the pixels that are defining this corner of the silo, for example, don't change. All I'm doing is removing pixels. So when I crop this like this, I'm going to have fewer pixels in the image, but the pixels that are there are going to be the same as they were. So I have not changed the quality of the information. I've just reduced how much information is there. I've reduced the number of pixels, but what pixels there are haven't changed. And of course, that means that I can't print it as large as I could before. So if I go ahead and click OK on that, now I come in here to Image and Image Size. We can say that at 300 pixels per inch, we're now down to 10.363 inches wide, whereas it was 13 something before, because I have simply cut in on the image. So we're going to cancel that, and we're going to undo the crop. Another choice you have in cropping, I'm on the crop tool, and here on the tool options bar, which is just below the menu bar, we have a few fields we can fill in. We have width, height, and resolution. So I can specify a particular width I want, and I can specify a particular height and a particular resolution. Now, if I specify a width, let's say, of 10 inches, and a height of 8 inches, let's say, then I can draw this out like this, and it's going to force that particular shape because I have specified that I want that shape. But what's going to happen is that if I, let's say, crop it like that, it's going to make the number of pixels per inch. It's still not going to change the pixels. If I, say, decide to crop to this particular view, the pixels that represent each of these different parts of the barn and the trees and the cow will all be unchanged. It's just that I won't have any more pixels than that in the image. And likewise, if I come up like this, still the pixels have not changed. Now I'm going to cancel that. And Now I'm also going to specify a resolution. So let's specify 300 pixels per inch. Whoops, that won't do. 300 pixels per inch. All right, now it looks like it's going to be the same deal here, but the difference is that Photoshop is going to resample the image. It's going to recalculate all the pixels to force it so that I have 300 pixels per inch at whatever size I choose. So I can make it really small like this, and Photoshop is going to recalculate so that I have 300 pixels per inch. So if I go to image size here, we have 300 pixels per inch. We have 3,000 pixels. Well, there should be a whole lot less than that. So what's happened is that it's done that resampling, and again, it has not increased the detail. It has only crowded in more pixels in that space. So I'm going to undo that. Generally, you don't want to specify a resolution when you're doing this, when you're doing the cropping, because that is forcing Photoshop to resample the image. You can specify a height and or a width if you want to constrain to specific sizes, or you can not specify anything there and do a free form crop. And of course, in the process of cropping, you can change the angle. So that's image size and cropping for print. And basically the one most important thing to remember for print is you want to preserve your pixels. The more pixels that you can preserve of the original file, the better your quality is going to be. Whereas with the web, it's a little bit different. The first thing you need to understand about the web, there is a myth that the web is at 72 pixels per inch. Now remember, for print, for professional level printing, your goal is 300 pixels per inch. For the web, the myth is that the web is 72 pixels per inch. Well, that never was true, and it's even less true now than ever before, because the number of pixels per inch you get is a function of the size and resolution of your monitor. And you have no control over the size and resolution of the monitor of someone looking at your website. But you can design an image to take up a certain amount of space in your web design. Now, how big that prints on someone else's monitor is going to be up to their monitor's specifications. So let's take a look at this image on the Warren Wilson College website. I'm going to right-click on this image and click Copy Image. Go back to Photoshop and go to File and New. And because I copied that image, it copied onto the Windows clipboard, which is an area of memory. Because Photoshop recognizes that there is an image in the clipboard, it assumes that that's what I want to bring in. So it's going to automatically set the width and height and the resolution according to that image. So I'm going to just click OK here. Don't want to change a thing. And now I'm going to click on Edit and Paste. And now I have that image in here from the Warren Wilson College website. So you notice that this says, if we go to image size, it says it's at a resolution of 72 pixels per inch. And at 72 pixels per inch, it's 5.556 inches. But if I take a look at this and I hold a ruler up onto my monitor, we've got a ruler right here, and so I hold this up and I see that this is actually only 4.5 inches wide because my monitor is not at a resolution of 72 pixels per inch. I can find out what it is by clicking on, if I right click on the monitor and click on Screen Resolution, I can see that my resolution is 1920 pixels across, and I know that my monitor is 22 inches across. So if I now go to the calculator here and go 1920 divided by 22, I see that my monitor is at a resolution of 87.27 pixels per inch. So My monitor is 87 pixels per inch, not 72 pixels per inch. Your results may vary. So this idea that the web is at 72 pixels per inch is simply untrue. But nevertheless, here is this image. I can zoom in on it, go to the zoom tool in Photoshop, and a little demonstration of the up-resing concept I talked about before. So for example, you can't really see his eye. You see that there's some information there, but not much. So let's say we want to make this, we want to up-res this for print. So I'm going to go to image size, I'm going to resample it, and I'm going to change it to 300 pixels per inch at this same size. So now, here's the image. Now I can zoom way in on it. But you can see that I have not actually gained any information. In fact, if anything, it looks a little blurrier than it did before, because Photoshop cannot create information where there wasn't any to begin with. So let's undo that image size. Go back to this. Now the goal with the web is you want to have your image be a certain size on your design. So what's important here is not pixels per inch, because you have no control over number of inches. What you have control over is number of pixels. So you figure out on your design that you want this to be a certain number of pixels wide. And then you can go to Photoshop and you can go to image size, and resample it and specify the number of pixels wide or high that you want it. In this case, you would want to resample it. And so for the web, your goal is to have a certain number of pixels. And you can change that by going to image size and resampling the image. Now, this constrained proportions, you want to make sure you do constrain the proportions, because otherwise you're going to distort the image. I'll give you a quick demonstration of that. Let's say that I want to change this to 400. Whoops. Let's make it 400 by 400 pixels. So we click OK, and that's what happens. It's a square, and it has simply stretched it to make that square. So undo image size. So you want to make sure that you maintain the proportions. Image size. So we constrain the proportions, and we resample the image. And now with the proportions constrained, if I change the width, let's say I change it to 500 to, let's say make it 300, it's going to change the height because it's going to maintain the same proportions there. I'm going to cancel that, and if I want to crop it, I can crop it with the crop tool. Say I want just him. I'll bring it a little further here. And bring it down a little tighter there. And click OK. So now I have just that part of the image. And if I go to image size, we see that it is much smaller than it was before. And we know that we cannot increase that size. We will not gain any quality by increasing that. So I am stuck with a very small image here. That is basically the deal on cropping and resizing images with Adobe Photoshop. I hope that's been helpful.